Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I work at a hotel at the end of the world. My job sucks ever since my dad and became my new boss. As the title says, my long-dead aunt has recently reappeared to attempt to seize ownership of my uncle's, her husband's, for Star Hotel for unknown, but very likely nefarious reasons. But before all that, I got a promotion. My uncle's been having me sub in for the old night clerk for reasons like to recover from mono, and doesn't want another nervous breakdown from listening to the voices in eternal black void. Some of which are valid, but some of which are just plain silly. Most employees hear some variation of cousin, second cousin, or out-of-town hire. The last night clerk was one of the few local employees in the town at the edge of the world. No, I can't tell you where we are. Sorry. Policy, meaning she's literally grown up with the open black abyss that lies beyond the world in her backyard. You'd think she'd be used to it. I suppose it's a bit different actually working at a hotel at the very edge, with balconies hanging over impenetrable darkness, and guests that frequently have dripping fangs, or no mouse at all, but still. Anyway, she quit officially a few days ago, and guess who my uncle turned to fill the position? Two of my older cousins. Actually, they didn't want a graveyard shift, though. So then guess who he turned to? Me. I got the job. I'm a good choice, too. Growing up, instead of going to scout camp or joining summer soccer leagues, Mom would always send me here to work at my uncle's hotel, the Grand Delaquest. The first years I was in safe positions like kitchens or janitorial, but once I hit high school, he started letting me work as a bellhop. I was mainly responsible for things like carrying luggage and helping guests settle in. There were other responsibilities, though. I was in charge of prodding under beds after any rat people would check out to make sure they weren't still hiding there. And whenever ice machines started leaking green mist, I was in charge of directing traffic to other hallways. And if there were ever dead bodies, pretty common, lots of things like to come stay here before they die, I would be the first to see them and alert the cleanup crew to throw them into the void beyond the edge of the world. Don't get me wrong. Overall, being a bellhop was fairly safe. Most guests are none the wiser humans whose biggest concern is whether there's tofu bacon at our continental breakfast. There isn't. But I have a good amount of experience at the Grand Delaquest. I'll be a good night clerk. I'm more than prepared to check in our late-night blood-eater visitors or inform a man with no mouth that no money, no room pal for the umpteenth time. I've read the employee handbook back to front, okay, skimmed, and I even know how to make sure a check is real. I'm used to the hotel's oddities. That's why it took me so entirely by surprise when my Aunt Cynthia, Uncle Roy's dead wife, walked through the automatic sliding glass doors at 3 in the morning little over a week ago. A little context. My aunt's been dead for, what is it now, 10, 11 years? Her painting hangs next to my uncle's in the break room. Not really sure the entire story, but I distinctly remember seeing her face in the casket at the funeral, and then seeing that casket be covered by a literal ton of dirt. My uncle doesn't like talking about the specifics much. I know he really loved her, but she wasn't definitely dead. That's why you might forgive me when I regretfully inform you the first thing I said to her was asterisk, comma, asterisk. Goodness, I need to talk with janitorial, she said, barely looking at me. You can practically taste the dust. What are you staring at? She snapped at me. What happened to that other girl that used to sit there? She, got mono and quit. I replaced her. My Aunt Cynthia snorted. Well, I'll be talking with Roy about that. Now won't I? I think it was that comment, more than anything, that really made me snap to attention. My job? She was threatening my job? No room for me to just sit passively anymore. Do you have a room reservation? I said, we're already booked for the night. Room reservation. She shrieked and jabbed her finger at my chest, and electricity, real actual electricity, surged from the spot she touched. This is my hotel. How dare you? Then she strode past me, past the front desk, down the nearest hallway. When I tried to go after her, she was gone. Aunt Cynthia never screamed at me. Even when I broke her screen door as a kid, she was always calm. So who was that? One of the delightful benefits of night shift is if there's any major figure to fires, everybody's asleep. I'm, for the most part, in charge of putting them out myself. Or just not. That too. And as I wasn't about to wake up my uncle to tell him my first major contribution, as the new night clerk was letting his demonic, dead wife escape into the hotel, I had to wait until morning to talk to somebody. Before I went off to sleep after the night shift, I found my cousin Francis. Hey, so you remember Aunt Cynthia? Yeah, he said. Kay, so I think she might have walked in last night during my shift. Like alive. Francis was quiet. Then he shrugged. Hey, once I thought I saw Gandhi check in with a demon nun lady. Was it? Nah. He turned out to just be her familiar. So that conversation was super helpful. I decided to go directly to the source and sort of ask my uncle. Sort of, because as I said, he's really sensitive about the subject of his wife. He really loved her. Hey, I said to him later, with an air of subtlety to rival that of any spy. So, anything weird happened to you recently? Huh. Like, I don't know. Anybody kind of talked to you today or last night? He sighed, stacked his papers, and pushed up his glasses. What happened? Nothing. Everything's good. Just curious. After which point, I bolted from the office in a flurry of subterfuge and discreetness. Whatever, I told myself. I'd just forget it. Weird stuff happened here all the time. Maybe I'd just fallen asleep and dreamed it. The next night she came back. It was much the same. She strolled in, this time in a uniform I sometimes saw Uncle Roy wear on special event days, with a little name tag that read Aunt Cynthia, which we can all agree is an odd title to give herself, seeing how she's only an aunt to limited people. But okay then, fine. Similar to the day before, she insulted the cleanliness of the lobby, but this time she rounded the counter, attempted to sign into computer, then snarled in frustration when none of her passwords worked. After a minute of this, she strolled away again. Some nights she would come. Some nights she wouldn't. I stopped mentioning it to my cousins and never brought up again to my uncle. Each time she came, she declared she was going to speak with him, but as far as I could tell, she never did. Uncle Roy doesn't sleep here like a lot of the rest of us. He's grown up here at the edge of the world, knowing he'd take over the hotel one day, and he has a house in town. Could Aunt Cynthia leave? Was she somehow stuck in the Grand Deliquesce? I would see her walk to the front doors, but never saw her outside. Never during the day. It carried on like that for about a week. Odd, but nothing too terrible. Then 2 days ago, when she was ranting at me in a very un-Cynthia-like manner, another family walked in. An older-looking mother and her grown-up daughter, humans. So sorry about the time. The older lady apologized. She was dripping with water. Outside was pouring. No worries. You too must be the Pantelleys. I asked, yes, again, so sorry. Our cards. How dare you? Cynthia shrieked. Both the Pantelleys and I gaped. I'd never actually seen my aunt interact with any other guests. She'd always come in and left so quickly, there'd never been collision. Look at all that water you're dripping, my aunt ranted. You're making a mess of my establishment. Filthy, dirty. I'm sorry, the older woman said. I wasn't thinking. No, I said, not your fault. The weather's terrible. Just go check into your room and we'll take care of the mess. Cynthia snarled. We will absolutely not. Shut up. I said, look, whatever you're here to do, leave my job and this hotel out of it. This is my hotel. No, it's not. She glared at me. I glared back. The Pantelleys had the good sense to snatch their room key and scuttle away. For an entire minute, my aunt and I stayed like that, both of us staring each other down. Finally, she harumphed, adjusted her Aunt Cynthia name tag, and strolled away. "I'm going," she said. Finally, it wasn't until a bit later that I realized what she'd said. Not, "I'm going to talk to Roy about this," or "Where's my husband?" She'd simply said she was going. I did indeed clean up. We always keep spare towels at the front desk, so I used those to wipe the floor. Only once I'd finished did I see the suitcase at the foot of the receptionist's desk. They'd forgotten it, understandably, so during the kerfuffle. Once a bellhop, always a bellhop. I wheeled the suitcase to the elevator, took it up, then rolled it to the paneliste room. I knocked. No answer. "You forgot your bag." I called. "Nothing. I'll just leave it at the door." I started down the hallway, then paused. Something felt wrong. They'd only been in their room a few minutes. Surely they couldn't be asleep by now. And why hadn't they realized their bag was missing? I retreated to the door, knocked once more, then when nobody answered, inserted my master key. "Coming in," I said. No answer. I creaked the door open, giving them a chance to scream at me in case they were changing, then pushed it wide. The room was empty. Where did they go? I checked the bathroom first. Clearly, they'd come in. Their bags were on the beds and the lights were on, but where had they gone? To get ice maybe? Except their key cards were on the dresser. They hadn't left. I checked under the beds and in the closet. Nowhere. Finally, I crept to the balcony, fingers trembling, and pulled back the curtain. Aunt Cynthia held the younger, panelly woman by her neck, turned backwards. The woman struggled, hands waving in the air and feet kicking for a purchase at the balcony ledge. My aunt didn't seem fazed. She was busy with something else. Her face was upturned. With her free hand, she shoved handfuls of the human woman's hair into her mouth, swallowing and choking it down, tearing it off, biting bloody clumps from the woman's scalp and gulping them down like a fleshy newborn bird. In between bites, she was muttering, "Ruining my hotel," and disgusting, ill-mannered guests. The older, pantelly woman was gone entirely, but I could see shreds of her clothing littered around the balcony. It took me a second to collect myself. "Stop," I finally tried. My aunt's eyes shot to me. She ripped one more vicious clump from the woman's scalp. Then before I could react, before I could move, she thrust the woman off the balcony and into the eternal void. Hands reached from the darkness. The woman shrieked, sobbing, but the hands jerked her back, and she disappeared. Her scream cut off mid-shriek. "I told you," my aunt said. "This is my hotel." I wasn't listening. I leapt for the sliding door, threw it closed, then slammed down the bolt. It would crack. I was sure of it. All that stood between us was a thin sheet of glass. But my aunt didn't rage. She didn't bang or throw a tantrum. She merely stood there, watching me, trapped on the balcony. My uncle picked up on the first ring. "Yeah," he said groggily. "She's here," I said. "Your wife." He didn't ask anything else. The phone merely clicked. Minutes later, he was at the hotel. "Where?" he said, and I led him upstairs to the balcony. For nearly 2 hours they talked. I sat outside the room the entire time. For his protection, I told myself, but what could I have done if she decided to hurt him? The woman was inhumanly strong. What was she? "Meeting," he told me when he emerged, and I helped gather the rest of my cousins and a few local employees. When all of us, those who weren't currently on active shift, gathered in the break room, my uncle gestured to Cynthia. They'd come to an understanding, he explained. They would be our joint managers for now. Whatever Cynthia said went. If she instructed us to do something, we should treat it as if it had been an instruction from him. My aunt smiled at all of us, but at the very end of the speech, she looked at me specifically, adjusted her badge, and winked. I work at a hotel at the end of the world. For my entire life, my uncle has known what to do in every situation. He's fixed every problem that's arisen, but I think now there may be a problem even too big for him. I don't know what to do. I don't know what they talked about, or why he's letting her stay after what she did to 2 of our guests. For now, all I know is that when it rains, I plan to lay out towels at the doors. For those of you who are considering coming for a stay, please do. There's something comforting about laying in your bed and staring at the unending blackness. But please, if you do come, Just use an umbrella when it rains. Story 2. I'm trapped in a public bathroom, and I think I may never leave. Dude, I should not have had that last beer. Or maybe it was the 5 shots of Fireball before we left the house. Either way, my stomach was absolutely destroyed as I stumbled into this sketchy gas station bathroom. My brothers at Sigma Chi are waiting on me. I need to hurry. Bro, emergency. I muttered, pushing through the heavy door. The place reeked, but whatever. I was about to explode. My Sigma Chi tattoos were just barely visible under my wrinkled polo as I made my way to the middle stall. The lock was busted, but who cares? I'd be in and out. Man, I was so wrong. As soon as I sat down, my gut just went haywire. Like, way beyond normal beer shits. This was something else entirely. Wave after wave hit me. Hot and wet like ground beef forcing itself out my asshole. I couldn't even move my toes. My legs felt like jelly. What the hell? I groaned, checking my phone. How? Already been here an hour? That couldn't be right. I'm fucking wasted. I tried calling my boy Tyler to come check on me, but my phone kept dropping calls. The fluorescent light was flickering like crazy, making weird shadows dance on the walls. Probably just the alcohol messing with my head. By hour 2, I was getting concerned. This was not normal. Even after my legendary celebratory hangover keggers, my body felt like it was eating itself from the inside out. I kept hearing weird scratching sounds in the walls. Probably just old pipes, right? I can't hear shit over the sound of wet slop hitting brown water. That's when I noticed the graffiti. Weird stuff I swear wasn't there before. Messages scratched into the paint. It watches, day 8. Getting weaker. The creature feeds. Probably just some emo kids trying to be scary. I would have laughed if I wasn't feeling so awful. My phone buzzed. Raven's name popped up. My goth girlfriend with all her dark makeup and fishnet everything. She was probably wondering where I disappeared to. We'd been at some party, and she'd been looking incredible in that new black corset with all the buckles and chains. Kyle, where did you go? You just vanished from the party. Her voice had that smoky quality from her clove cigarettes. I'm still here in my full makeup and platform boots, and Brad's asking if you're okay. Hey babe, I managed, trying to sound normal. Just had to use the bathroom real quick. This gas station on, I looked around for a sign. Highway 9. Even in my weakened state. I smiled, thinking about her towering over everyone at the party in her platform boots. All 9 feet of my Amazonian goth goddess. You've been gone for 2 hours, Kyle. 2 hours? No way. That can't be right. I just got here. Something shifted in the shadows behind the stall. Probably just my imagination. I was pretty drunk when this started. You sound weird. Are you sick? Raven's concern was clear even through her usual deadpan delivery. I could picture her adjusting her silver nose ring like she did when she was worried. Just a beer, you know? Had way too much. I tried to laugh it off, but another wave hit me hard. My vision blurred. Listen, I might need... The scratching in the walls got louder, way louder, like something big was moving around in there. Kyle, what was that noise? Probably just pipes or whatever. I was starting to feel really weak. Hours of this had drained everything out of me. Hey Raven, if something happens... What? Kyle, you're scaring me. What do you mean if something happens? I could hear her combat boots clicking as she paced. Those custom-made size 15 boots that helped her reach her full 9-foot height. She was probably smearing her dark lipstick as she bit her lip. She always did that when she was anxious. That's when I realized the scratching wasn't coming from the pipes anymore. It was coming from right behind me. It's right behind me, isn't it? Something was in here with me, and it had been right behind me, waiting for me to get weak enough. The creature, I whispered, finally understanding what those graffiti messages meant. What? The creature? Kyle, what are you talking about? The creature right behind me. I gasped as a final wave of shit fluttered out my ass. The sound slowed as my body failed me. The sound of my farts somber and slow like jazz. My body finally gave out completely. The thing, that creature had been right behind me if I hadn't made that clear enough. Hunted me this whole time, and I had been too drunk to realize it. As everything went dark, I could hear Raven 9 feet tall, screaming my name to the phone, her voice cracking with panic. She'd probably show up here, in her full goth gear. She's 7'5" even without the platform heels, but she doesn't mind being even taller for me. The dramatic winged eyeliner, the dark eyeshadow that made her look like some beautiful specter, ready to fight whatever had taken me. But it would be too late. The last thing I heard was wet feeding sounds, my girlfriend's desperate voice promising to burn this whole place down with her ritual candles, her sobs mixing with sounds I really didn't want to identify. I couldn't help but think about how she'd wear her 19-inch tall heels to my funeral. She knew I always wanted a woman who was 9 feet tall. The creature had found its meal, and now it would wait for the next clueless, helpless, Sigma Chi brother like me who had one too many brews. I could only hope I'd be lucky enough to crack a cold one with Jesus up in heaven. Edit, what's up? I'm Chad, president of Sigma Chi House, and right now, I've been tasked with solving Kyle's murder or disappearance, or whatever the hell happened to my brother. The cops basically shrugged when that 9-foot goth chick Raven came to them with her story about Kyle being trapped in some gas station bathroom. I mean, I get it. She's intimidating as hell in those custom-sized 15 combat boots and all that black makeup. But Kyle was one of ours, and we don't abandon our brothers. So here I am, pulling up to the sketchy gas station on Highway 9 in my lifted F-150, ready to get some answers. The place looks like it hasn't been updated since the 80s, and there's this weird smell in the air, like something died and got left to rot. Bro, this place gives me the creeps, I muttered, adjusting my backwards cap as I walked toward the building. The neon, open 24 hours sign flickered ominously. Inside, the clerk, some dude with more piercings than Raven, barely looked up from his phone when I asked about Kyle. Yeah, there was some frat boy in here a few days ago, he said with zero interest. Went into the bathroom, never came out. We figured he climbed out the window or something. What do you mean never came out? The clerk shrugged. Bathroom door was locked from the inside when we finally checked. Nobody in there, though. Just his phone on the floor and some mess. My stomach dropped. This was not the explanation I was hoping for. I headed toward the men's room, pushing through that heavy door Kyle had described to Raven during their last phone call. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and immediately I could see why Kyle had been freaked out. The middle stall had graffiti everywhere, messages scratched into the paint that definitely weren't there during normal vandalism. Day 12. Still here. It feeds on weakness. The creature hunts. And at the bottom, in what looked like Kyle's handwriting, tell Chad to avenge me. Tell Raven I love her platforms. What the hell, Kyle? I whispered, pulling out my phone to text a group chat. But my signal was completely dead in here. That's when I heard it, scratching in the walls, just like Raven had described from Kyle's phone call. My first instinct was to bolt, but I'm the president of Sigma Chi, we don't run from anything. Yo, whatever's in here. I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. You mess with the wrong fraternity. The scratching stopped. Then something much worse started, a low, wet sound coming from the pipes above, like something large was moving through them. My phone suddenly got signal and immediately started buzzing with texts from the brothers asking for updates. But the most chilling message was from Raven. Get out of there now. I can sense it waking up. 9 feet of goth intuition was not something to ignore. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The same pneumatic his Kyle had mentioned was back, only in reverse, like the room was sealing itself. Oh, come on. I banged on the door. I've got a charity mixer plan. The creature, whatever Kyle had encountered, was getting closer. I could feel its presence growing stronger, just like he'd described. But unlike my brother, I wasn't weakened by hours of beer and Fireball. I was stone cold sober and pissed off. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Raven. If you're still alive, the creature feeds on desperation. Stay angry, not afraid. Kyle Spirit says the silver cross on your chain burns it. I looked down at the Sigma Chi cross pendant around my neck, the one Kyle had given me when I became president. It was starting to glow with a faint silver light. Was Kyle watching me from beyond the grave? Would he protect me like a Stan from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? All right, you ugly bastard. I growled, gripping the cross. Let's see how you handle a pissed-off rat president with nothing to lose and a trunk full of cold ones. Story 3. I inspect the Svalbard seed vault in Norway. There are 31 subfloors. Throwaway for obvious reasons. I've tried posting about this on other subs, different accounts, but the posts always get buried or disappear. I know someone here will believe me. I work for Nordgen. We do monthly inspections of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It's basically a doomsday backup for the world's plant/crop life, frozen seeds stored in case of catastrophe. I've been doing this for 6 years. It's routine, humidity checks, air pressure, frost integrity. Nothing weird. I do it with a colleague named Ever from Crop Trust. I've been doing inspections with Ever for a few years now. He's a good guy, smart, calm, easy to work with. We occasionally hang out after shifts, grab food, shoot the shit. Last month during a standard inspection, Ever veered off, said he had to check something, and walked through a steel door I swear I'd never seen before. Before it closed, I caught a glimpse of an elevator. Just a single button. Down. I finished my duties and waited. I'm not allowed to leave without him. 10, maybe 15 minutes passed. Eventually curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door and pressed the button. It took a while, and when it finally opened, the smell was vile. Not cold storage or mildew, rot, meat left in the sun. The elevator had a full panel, 31 sublevels. I've never been told there was anything below the vault chamber. The seed banks are all accounted for in the public schematics. So what the hell is all that space for? I backed away. A few minutes later, Ever came out looking pale, like genuinely sick, like he'd seen something awful. He looked at me, locked eyes, and mumbled something. I said, "Pardon?" He spoke just a little louder this time, but trembling. "Did you see the elevator?" I hesitated, which made it abundantly obvious. I didn't even get a word out before he screamed. He knows. You fool." I just stood there, frozen. He's never raised his voice to me. He's always been calm, cheerful. We're friends for fuck's sake. This wasn't him. As we exited the tunnel, I tried to apologize, to ask what was going on. He didn't look at me. I said, "Ever, just talk to me, man, please." He turns towards me, head down, and whispers. Whispers so quietly I could barely hear it. One word, Drog. My whole body tensed. Heart raced immediately. That word, I hadn't heard it since I was a kid. My brother used to try and scare me with those dumb Old Norse ghost stories, Drog. The dead who walk beneath the ice. What the fuck is beneath the vault? Are crop trusts on it? Or just Ever? I can't sleep. My mind is racing. Not sure when I'll get answers, though. My supervisor called last night. Says next month's inspection is postponed. Ever is missing. As I'm finishing typing this, I see a delivery guy pull into my driveway. Park on the street, you fucking asshole. Envelope. No return address. Inside, just an unlabeled flash drive. Am I dumb enough to put this thing in my computer? Story 4. My wife got a skin graft from a cow. Now she thinks she'll give birth to an animal. My pregnant wife got in a car accident a few months ago. Thank God it didn't kill anyone, but it tore a chunk out of her arm. The doctors decided she needed a skin graft. I had heard of animal skin being used before, but it didn't make it any less strange when they sewed the cow skin on. It was disturbing to watch. The skin looked slippery in the doctor's hands. And it looked so out of place on my wife's arm. It wasn't the right color. It was filled with tiny red holes, like some sort of fleshy lace. The cow skin veil was sewn on my wife's arm, and I thought that was the end of it. But even when she started to heal, even when everything went right just like the doctor said, my wife never really got over it. I kept catching her staring at the spot on her arm. She didn't pick at it. She just stared for what felt like hours sometimes, like she was reading it, observing it, waiting for it to change. That's not what concerned me though, not really. One day she looked at me and she told me, part of her was not like it should be anymore. She was not completely human. I told her she was just having anxiety. I know that's dismissive. I just didn't know what to say. I knew the car accident was traumatic, and so was the surgery, but how was I honestly supposed to respond to that? I pushed my worry down. I wanted to focus on the excitement of being a parent, and the miracle that my wife was okay, but she didn't stop staring. Even when the holes healed and the cow's skin melted into the rest of her arm like its own home, like it belonged there, I felt like she was waiting for something. I did not know what. A few weeks after the surgery, I woke up deep in the night. I wasn't sure what had disturbed me, but my wife was gone. Then I realized I could hear something. It was a shrill, singing voice. It sounded like someone pretending to be a cartoon character. I frowned and sat up and immediately flinched. My wife was crouched next to the bed, right beside my head. Her neck was tucked into her chest, looking at her swollen stomach. "Are you talking to our baby?" I asked. "Yes," she told me. "But it's not your baby anymore. The cow's skin is a part of me, so I am a part of its lineage now." She paused and thought for a moment. "I don't know what I'll give birth to. I think it might be an animal." "What the fuck are you talking about?" I snapped, fighting not to raise my voice. She looked at me and smiled slightly. "They say an organ transplant can change your personality. Your DNA remembers everything. I don't think this is very different. I don't think it's as absurd as you believe." I told her to go back to bed. She just said part of her wasn't like it should be anymore. She said she wasn't completely human. I decided if she didn't start acting normal by the end of the week, I would take her to the doctor, but I would never get the chance. The next morning, my wife was in bed again. A strange smell drifted through the house, like a spirit. It smelled earthy and rotten, but there was another part, almost a sweetness. It was so pungent, it was almost a physical presence. It pushed against my nose and squeezed around my head. When I left the bedroom, it only got worse. I followed the smell to the kitchen, where my wife was sitting at the table. She was naked, whispering softly like she did the night before. The whole room glistened. I reached my hand to the wall, and what I felt was sticky and soiled. "What the hell is this?" I shouted. My wife turned her head and smiled. Then I saw her breasts, dripping with sickly yellow. I took in a breath of rotten air, and it finally hit me what it was. The kitchen was smeared with spoiled breast milk. There was the faint sweetness of birth behind it all. I was entirely frozen. I needed to call the hospital. I didn't understand any of this. I didn't even know how she was producing breast milk this early, or how it had spoiled inside her body and turned sick and yellow. I needed to call the fucking hospital. I had tried to push my worry down, try to focus on the excitement of parenthood, but this was more than anxiety or trauma. It was more than I could handle, and I failed my wife by not realizing that. I needed to move, run back upstairs. I needed to find my phone. I needed to call the hospital, but I just couldn't bring myself to move. My paralysis only deepened when my wife stood abruptly, and a dark yellow liquid spilled down her legs. "The baby's coming," she shouted with a grin. Pain groans began to slip from her mouth, but her smile never faltered. She widened her stance, and her legs began to tremble. The yellow liquid was pooling onto the floor now, rancid and sweet, and eating at everything it touched. Tears crept in her eyes and flowed down her cheeks until she was howling in pain. But the joy never left her face. My head was a labyrinth of thoughts, all tripping over each other. So not a single one came to me clearly, but the smell did. I could still smell the rot. I watched in horror as a mound of flesh fell from my wife's body. Squirming and wet, the baby was an amalgamation. It hurts my eyes to look at it. Its skin gleamed like the rotten milk, and four thin legs sprouted from its torso. On the end of every leg were 5 fingers. On the end of every finger there were hooves. Clumps of hair littered its head like mold. A skinny tail hung from its back. It had two mouths side by side, gaping and begging and screaming. Its existence must have been agony. It hurt my eyes to look at. My wife knelt down to it, cooing softly. She took the baby and held it to her heart. What do you think we should name it? Story 5. I think I may have found an actual book of Satan. For starters, I'm not talking about the Satanic Bible or anything written by humans. I'm a goth atheist, and in the past, even experimented in Levian Satanism. I met a girl about 2 weeks ago. She was pretty, messy dark hair, pale skin, makeup, goth like me, and had a punk look to her. She introduced herself as Kaya, and we had met at my job. We hit it off quickly and agreed to go on a date. Everything went well, but after being intimate for the first time, Kaya confessed she just wanted more friends with benefit-style relationship, which I accepted despite some disappointment, as I liked her. Kaya was a little odd at times. She would respond immediately to texts or not for hours. She didn't like eating in public, and seemed to always want to do something that would stir up drama. Of course, these things are pretty normal, and I just thought she was kind of quirky. But I then realized a few things about Kaya. I had never seen her eat outside of snacks. Her tattoos always seemed slightly off, as in they seemed different each time, and would always avoid people in public. It was disturbing, but it was conceivable that she was just antisocial and had an eating disorder or something. I called her a couple times, but she never answered, and I was about to call the cops when texted me this. Don't stop being a wolf. You'll find it under the tree with 2 crows' nests in the graveyard. I'm sorry. You'll never see me again. I know you love my horns. She stopped responding after that. I went to the graveyard and found 2 trees that matched the description, but only one had clear signs of being dug up, so I dug some and found a wooden box. Inside the box were 3 things: a vial of blood, a bottle of vodka, and a lock diary with a 3-digit combination lock. On the cover of the book was Hail the Devil, written in Swedish. I was creeped out and still trying to reach Kaya, but nothing too scary yet. I tried to pry the lock off, but I couldn't, and then something really freaky happened. I hadn't been paying attention to the tree, and when I realized it had a grave on the other side of it, I checked the grave because I felt guilty about disturbing the dead, and what I saw was haunting. The grave was old and weathered. It had what looked like a deer skull lying in front of it. Before I could really see anything, a baby crow fell out of the tree and hit the ground hard in front of the grave. Its neck snapped, which is when I saw that the grave's name was Kaya Smith, born 1876, died in 1912, which is when the second baby crow fell to its death. I brought the box home and I'm freaked out. It's been a day and I haven't been able to get the lock off the notebook. I'm honestly starting to wonder if Kaya was some sort of demon or ghost or something. All I know is that I've been looking for answers or some sign of Kaya, and there's nothing. I'll keep updating if I manage to get the lock off. Story 6. My best friend wasn't real. I swear to God I didn't know. I didn't know I was an imaginary one. Okay, let me start from the beginning. I've always had trouble fitting in, ever since grade school. It wasn't like people hated me. They just didn't notice me, like I wasn't even there. That all changed when I met Ezra. Ezra was the first person who actually talked to me like I mattered. I met him in 6th grade, sitting under the bleachers during recess, sketching this creepy drawing of a house with 100 windows and no doors. He looked up at me and said, "Ever feel like you're only real when someone's looking at you?" That messed with me, because, yeah, I did feel like that sometimes. I sat next to him, and we just clicked. From that day on, we were inseparable. We didn't hang with anyone else. We passed notes in class with weird riddles, and if you die in a dream, do you die in real life type stuff. We spent every afternoon at the abandoned train tracks behind my school, where we built this hideout from scrap wood and old sheets and called it the Crooked House. We swore that if one of us ever disappeared, The other had to come there and wait until midnight, like some blood pact. I told my mom about Ezra a few times, but she'd just go, "Oh, your imaginary friend again," like she was joking. She even said, "You'll grow out of him eventually." I laughed, but it made my stomach drop a little. Years passed. Ezra never changed. Like, literally never. We hit high school, and I got taller, deeper voice, acne. Ezra? Same as he looked in 6th grade. Pale skin, shaggy hair, black hoodie even in the summer. I asked him about it once, and he just said, "Don't you get it? I'm not like you." I thought he meant, like, metaphorically, emo stuff. Then things got weird. I started noticing how nobody ever talked to Ezra, not even teachers. Even when he raised his hand in class, they'd call on someone else. At lunch, he sat with me and no one said anything. But when I left my tray there once and came back, there was only one tray. I asked a classmate, "Hey, did you see where Ezra went?" And they said, "Who?" I thought it was a joke, but it kept happening. And then I checked the yearbook. Ezra wasn't in it. Not in 6th grade. Not in 7th. Not even in the attendance records when I snuck into the admin office. I confronted him at the Crooked House. I was shaking, holding this crumpled attendance sheet with his name not on it. He just smiled and said, "I told you I wasn't like you." I screamed at him. I said he was fake, that I made him up, that maybe I was going crazy. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. "No, I made you up." I laughed, like genuinely laughed, because that was so dumb. I'm the one with a mom and homework and grades and all that. Ezra's the weird hoodie kid that no one notices. Then he pulled something out of his pocket. A notebook. My notebook. I recognized the black cover and the duct tape on the spine. Except I'd lost it in 7th grade. He opened it and flipped through pages and pages of entries. Each one was about me. Subject number 17 still unaware of his fabricated origin. His emotional responses continue to improve. He now exhibits paranoia, self-awareness emerging, termination likely approaching. I felt my knees buckle. I told him to stop, to shut up, but he kept reading. If subject number 17 continues to question the narrative, he may become unstable. Emergency failsafe authorized. He looked up at me. "Sorry," he said, "but I have to shut you down now." I ran. I sprinted through the woods behind the tracks, sobbing. I didn't stop until I reached my house. But something was wrong. The house was empty, cold, dust on everything, like it hadn't been lived in for years. There were no pictures of me on the walls. Only Ezra, as a baby, as a kid, blowing out birthday candles, holding a dog I didn't recognize. A school portrait with the same hoodie. That's when I saw the photo on the fridge. Ezra and a woman I'd never seen before, and written on it in Sharpie was, "Ezra and Mom, 2021. My mom." I stumbled to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. I didn't have a reflection. I swear to you, I didn't. I was never real. Ezra made me. I was some kind of program, a mental experiment, maybe a dream, maybe something worse. He made me to feel less alone, a friend that could never leave, one that believed he was real. And now I'm slipping. I can feel myself fading. Every time I blink, it's like the world skips forward a second. My memories are blurring. My hands feel transparent. I don't know how much longer I have, but if you're reading this, if this post stays up, it means I haven't disappeared yet. Please, come to the Crooked House behind Greenfield High. Midnight. If someone's there, tell them I was real, even if I never existed. Story 7. The Unholy Trinity. I grew up in a small town in the Bible Belt of the Deep South. My mom was a devout Baptist and was very strict when I was a kid. We were only allowed outside to go to church, and even then we were forced to wear hoods and told not to look at or speak to anyone. We weren't allowed to celebrate Halloween, and we were sent to bed without dinner if we couldn't recite the day's Bible verse perfectly. I never knew my father, and I imagine even Batman couldn't get much out of my mother if he tried. Any questions about him would be answered with a wooden paddle. I didn't know his name, what he looked like, or even where he came from, and that was that. I was just another child of a coward who wasn't man enough to stick around and deal with the consequences of his actions. Or so I thought. November 2nd, 2022 was the day everything changed. My 18th birthday. I woke up that day a man, but staring back at me from the mirror was the same soul-crushed, brainwashed boy who went to bed hungry the night before. I moped down the stairs and dragged my feet to the table for breakfast. I was greeted with the tired, scared faces of my siblings and the stern, concentrated frown of my mother, but not a single happy birthday. We didn't celebrate birthdays. My mom believed the act of congratulating yourself on being born was blasphemy because it was Jesus' achievement, not ours. But as I battled my way through my cold, burnt breakfast, I realized something. I was an adult now. I could do whatever I wanted short of drinking. I stand by the belief that that is a stupid law. I decided I was finally going to confront my mom about all the secrets she had hidden from me growing up, the ones that kept me up at night, and more importantly, kept me in check. Who was my father? My question cut like a blade through the somber silence of the dining room. My mother shot me her signature glare, but it was especially threatening in this moment. "What?" she growled. "Don't tell me you're going deaf already." I retorted, entranced by confidence. "You disgusting little cretin. How dare you speak to me like that?" She leapt out of her chair, and it scraped on the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. She grabbed the wooden paddle from the counter and stormed towards me. She didn't even bother telling me to turn around. She swung straight for my face, but I caught it before it could make impact. My hand stung, and in a fit of rage, I snatched the paddle from her and began beating her with it. I don't remember much after that. I blacked out. When I came to, my mom was on the floor in a puddle of her own blood. There was blood on the paddle, on the walls, on me and on my siblings. They looked like those shell shock soldiers from old war photos. I dropped the paddle and bent down in an attempt to wake my mom up. When she didn't respond, I checked her pulse, and as I'm sure you guessed by now, it was too late. She was dead. I wanted to cry, but there was no time. We needed to leave and fast. I told my siblings to pack a bag each, and I ran upstairs to do the same. When I was done, I ran into my mom's room. This was my last chance to find the answers I'd been looking for, and I wasn't going to waste it. I dug around in her things. I checked drawers, cabinets, closets. There had to be something. An old photo album, a letter, something. I stood in the middle of her room and took a moment to think when the Jesus painting that hung over her bed caught my eye. A swarm of bad memories flooded my mind. I leapt towards it and threw it off the wall and onto the floor. I looked back at the wall and saw that there was a hole in it that had been covered by the painting. It wasn't a small hole. It had the capacity to home a family of barn owls. I reached in and pulled out a stack of papers from among the many other things that didn't seem as important. They were hospital records. For the first time in my life, I felt hope. My birth certificate had to be in here. It would have my father's name on. Maybe he could help us. I found myself lost in this daydream of me and my siblings running into my father's arms and finally being blessed with a loving home. Unfortunately, that dream would leave as quick as it came. I began to read the records, and my hope turned into confusion and gut-wrenching fear. They were results from fertility tests, and they were negative. This had to be a mistake. Of course my mom could get pregnant. She had kids. I threw the papers aside and reached back into the hole. I pulled out a stack of 3 books. They were spell books, not like pagan ones, like satanic ones. I flipped through them in a last attempt to find anything. I only got to the first one, and halfway through the second before I came to a page that had been annotated. It was tilted pregnancy spell. Offer up your womb for the seed of the king. It felt like I had swallowed my own heart. This couldn't be true. It was ridiculous. I was ridiculous for thinking it was anything other than a look into my mother's fucked up psyche, right? Either way, I didn't have time to think about it. Someone would have heard my mother's screams, and it wouldn't be long until the sheriff was at the door. I grabbed my siblings and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept running until I passed a sign for town, and then kept running for another hour. We slept in the woods for a while, until we came across an abandoned warehouse, and that's where we've stayed for the last 3 years. I keep me and my siblings fed by stealing from local gas stations, as that's all there really is out here. It's not much, but it's enough. I've also taken up the job of providing my siblings with an education. We were homeschooled, so that's all I really have to go off, but I think they're doing well. I don't leave the warehouse much, and I don't let my siblings leave at all. I try and avoid going outside as much as possible, but even then I have to wear a hood and avoid looking at people. This isn't too hard for me because, if you remember, these were the rules set in place by my mother when we went to church. It's beginning to become clear to me now that something has to change soon. I can't keep forcing my siblings to live like this. They deserve a proper education, a reliable food source, a home. So I'm writing this in the hopes that someone will take pity on us and find it in their heart to lend a helping hand. I don't expect that to happen. After all, I'm a murderer and possibly the son of Satan. Sorry, bad joke. Anyway, that's all there really is to say right now. I'll probably post an update if this post gets any attention, but for now I have to go and deal with my brother. His horns have started coming in, so it's been non-stop whining and crying for the past 2 months. Puberty, right? Story 8. Lump. I was 21 years old on the day of Mother's funeral, a milestone day that was usually spent with friends, drinking yourself into a stupor. For me, it was a day of sitting in a small, dank room with Mother's coffin on a pedestal, surrounded by empty chairs. The funeral home director would have some of their employees attend the funeral if no guests showed up, which seemed like a good idea when it was first presented. However, seeing them shuffle in and sit motionless in the back of the room filled me with a sense of shame. The thought that the only people, other than myself, who would attend her funeral did so out of obligation was too much to bear. I asked the director to send them away, and they left without a moment's hesitation, most likely returning to their own friends and families, where they would live and never give that poor, lonely woman another thought. I couldn't blame them, though Mother wasn't the type of woman who wanted to be remembered. She had spent most of her life in isolation due to a deep-seated distrust of people, a belief that had taken root shortly after I was born. It had something to do with a man showing up at our doorstep when I was still a baby and causing a scene. She never liked to go into details about the incident and would quickly change the subject. I once asked her if the man was my father. Her face turned red, and she screamed at me to go to my room. That was the last time I ever asked about the man or my father. I was 7. My name is Colin, but Mother always called me Lump, a nickname I acquired when I was still in school, before I was pulled out and placed in a homeschooling program. A group of older kids in 1st or 2nd grade picked on me mercilessly and would call me Lump until I cried. I was born with a lump on the side of my stomach, about the size of a softball. It posed no health issues, and Mother constantly told me that we didn't have the money to have it removed. So I lived with it and suffered the consequences of an uncaring healthcare system combined with the cruelty of children. But Mother did her best to help me feel better about it all. "They're just jealous," she said from the front seat of our old station wagon. She opened the glove box for tissues and handed one back to me. "Dry those eyes, sweetie. They're jealous because the lump you have, the lump you want gone so badly, reminds them that they aren't loved as much as you are." "Why?" I asked through sniffles and a tissue. "Well, I never told you this before, but what's in that lump of yours is all the love I have for you. Before you were born, I loved you so much that it all gathered together in that lump." "Gross." I screamed with a smile. "Not gross at all. Now, no matter where I am and where you are, you'll have a bit of my love with you, right there by your side in that lump." "Okay." She looked up into the rear view mirror to glance back at me. "I had a love lump once too. It was you, and now here you are, my little lump," she said with that silly baby voice that always made me laugh. We giggled about that the entire way home, and from then on, I was called Lump I was glad that she loved me because I didn't seem to find much affection at school. I never got close to any of my classmates, and I rarely had friends who stuck around for more than a week or two. I may have moved on and accepted my new nickname, but that didn't mean the bullying had stopped. If anything, it had gotten much worse. Mother took me out of school. Once she found out that someone had taken a picture of me shirtless in the locker room. The picture was discovered when some boys got into a fight over who would get to keep the photo next. The fight got pretty rowdy, and one of them ended up breaking the other's arm. Once we found out that the boys had just been suspended and that the matter was considered settled, Mother flipped out. She didn't care that I was halfway through first grade and dragged me out. "I will not have my boy paraded around as a freak," she shouted as she pulled me by my arm to the school parking lot. She stopped at the principal's parking spot and spat on his car. She looked back at the brick building where the principal, students, and teachers stood watching us through the window. "Fuck you," she screamed. "You should all feel ashamed." She switched to working nights, and during the day between naps, she made sure I was doing my schoolwork. She wasn't a great teacher, but she was patient and gave me all the attention she could. She worked herself ragged to take care of me, and that effort took a toll on her. I think she aged quicker than most people, primarily due to the stress of taking care of me on her own. Her fear of me being harmed in some way grew and grew. We spent most of our free time indoors, venturing out only to the grocery store or the backyard, but we rarely did much more than that. The isolation made it impossible for either of us to make or have friends. She played with me whenever I asked, and for a time, I thought that was enough. We fought constantly about my desire to leave the tiny world she had created for us. I called it prison, and she called it our home. I wanted to travel and explore, while she wanted to stay and wait. It wasn't until many years later that I began to realize just how deep her loneliness must have been. People are not meant to be alone, and when she died, that was a truth I learned very quickly. I attempted to carry on with my life as I had when she was alive, but the house was too quiet. Every creak and moan in the house made reminded me of just how alone I was. Sitting at the dinner table and looking at her empty chair would cause me to weep, not because I missed her, although I did, but I cried because I was alone, truly alone. The first bit of happiness I experienced after her passing came when I learned that she had left me a sizable inheritance. I had grown up believing we were relatively poor, barely scraping by. She had been very smart with her money. A few extremely lucky investments and her decision to live a budget-friendly life resulted in a small, tidy sum of money. It was a settlement she received from the incident with a man arriving at our house when I was a baby. He was the doctor who delivered me when I was born. Something in him had snapped, and the hospital paid Mother a hefty sum to smooth things over and to avoid bad press. It wasn't enough for me to retire on, but it was sufficient enough that I wouldn't have to work much, and I wouldn't need to worry about that for a long time. The news felt like an anvil being lifted off my chest. After a while, the joy turned bitter when I'd reach down and feel the lump in my side, wondering why she had lied all those years. Why would she claim that we couldn't afford to have this growth removed? I had learned to accept it as part of me, but even so, being able to live my life without it would have brought some sense of normalcy to what had been, for the most part, a normal childhood. I was 21 now, 21, and ready to spend Mother's money on my surgery. I was prepared to begin living my life the way I wanted, a life of discovery and without fear. I would get the lump removed. I sat on a cushioned table in the doctor's office. The paper sheet crinkled beneath my bare bottom. This was all unfamiliar to me. I hadn't been to a doctor's office in decades, not since I was a baby. When the nurse handed me the gown, I had to ask her what I was supposed to do with it. She scrunched her eyebrows at me. "You get undressed and put this on." I began to unbutton my pants. "Wait until I leave first," she said abruptly. My face felt like it was on fire with embarrassment. It was my first time at the doctor's office, and I had almost accidentally shown my dinky to the nurse. She was pretty. The thought of her nearly seeing my dinky caused it to stir. I quickly tried to calm myself down while she was gone, thinking she might be back at any moment. The last thing I wanted to do was to show her my privates. Mother always said that was a sacred right that a beautiful soul had to earn. I sat there for 2 hours. The clock on the wall taunted me with each tick. By the time the doctor came in, my legs were numb and tingly. I jumped down from the table to shake his hand, but my legs almost gave way. I caught myself with a stumble and kept my hand out for him to shake. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and ignored my outstretched hand. Instead, he snapped a latex glove over his fingers and onto his wrist. So let's take a look at this. His voice trailed off. He picked up his clipboard briefly and set it back down. Lump, he said finally. He plopped down onto a short rolling stool and cleared his throat. With that, I pulled the gown to the side so he could see. He was old, older than Mother had ever been. His hair was still blonde, though. It fell in small, tight curls across his forehead. His face was unshaven, and his breath stank even though his teeth were unnaturally white. His glasses sat on the tip of his nose as he stared at my side. Interesting, he said quietly. He sat up straight and rolled back toward a machine before wheeling back with it. What is this? I asked. This, he said as he squirted a gel onto the tip of the wand. This is an ultrasound. He placed the wand on the lump, and the coldness caused me to recoil slightly. It's going to be cold, he said, slightly annoyed. What does it do? I asked. He licked his lips and then pursed them together as he looked up at me. It lets us see what's in there, he said as he pointed up to the screen. Look up here at the screen. Whatever is in there, we'll be able to see it in here. He moved the wand around as he stared at the screen. I couldn't make heads or tails of what I was looking at. It's not a tumor if that's what you're thinking, he said matter-of-factly. His eyes suddenly widened. He turned his gaze to meet mine before looking back at the screen. He reached up and turned the screen so I could no longer see it. What is it? I asked. SHHHH. He continued to rub the wand on me for nearly 30 minutes without saying a word. Any time I spoke, he simply shushed me. A knock on the door finally managed to break his trance. The pretty nurse from before poked her head in and asked him if everything was all right. It's fine, he said hurriedly. He reached for the ultrasound and quickly pressed a few buttons, just getting a few pictures for this young man's files. She began to leave when the doctor called back to her. Nurse, these are printing out on printer 3. That idiot in IT still hasn't fixed this damn thing. Be a dear and grab them off the printer and put these in his files. The cute freckles across her nose and cheeks shifted as she scrunched her nose in annoyance. It was clear to everyone, save the doctor, that she did not like being called dear, and she did not like this man. She left and closed the door behind her. The doctor looked at me and then back at the lump. I chuckled. Mother always told me my lump was filled with her love. She said it was my love lump. The doctor did not chuckle. Well, that's just a load of horse shit, he quipped as he rolled back toward the counter. He grabbed a pen and began writing. It's nothing at all, just a type of cyst. Easy enough to eliminate with medication. I want you to take 2 of these for a week. That's 1 in the morning and 1 at night. Now say it back to me. HM, repeat it back to me so I know that you're paying attention. What do I need you to do with this medication? Oh, take 1 in the morning and then take 1 at night. He handed me the prescription, and as soon as my fingers touched it, he pulled it back. Take it with food, he said sternly. Okay, twice a day with food. I've got it. And come back to see me in a week. You should see a significant decrease by then. Do you have any questions for me? He asked. I've had this for a really long time, and Perfect, he said, cutting me off. Well, if that's everything, then I'll see you in a week. He jumped to his feet and left me with my prescription. I pulled on my clothes, took the bus to the pharmacy, and got my pills. I got back home and poured them out of the bottle and onto the table. 14 pills. That's all it would take to erase this thing from my life. All it would have ever taken to have given me a better childhood. It was hard not to be mad at Mother. It felt unfair that she wouldn't be alive right now while I'm discovering this, that she's not here for me to scream at, that she wouldn't have to see me stomp my feet and smash the dishes felt unfair. There was a lack of just in the though that she wouldn't have to clean up after the mess I made. No, she wasn't there for any of that, but I did it anyway. I shouted until my voice went hoarse, and there were no more things to throw across the kitchen. I scooped up my first pill and swallowed it after dipping my lips under the faucet. I should have saved at least one cup to drink them down with, but my anger hadn't allowed me the opportunity to think about the future. I cleaned up the mess as best I could and went to bed. It had been 2 days since I started taking the medicine when I began to notice that my lumps seemed to be growing. Occasionally, I felt a pain in my side. It was as if something in my gut was pressing against my insides and slithering around. It was enough to make my hair stand on end, so I reached out to the doctor's office to schedule an appointment. 3 days later, I was able to see my doctor. By this time, there was no doubt in my mind that the lump had grown. What was once the size of my fist was now easily twice as large. It weighed heavily on my side and pulled the skin taut, but it no longer hurt, and I no longer noticed the slithering I had felt the day before. I didn't have time to sit down once I entered the office. As soon as I told the woman at the front desk that I was there for my appointment, a nurse came through a door in the back and asked me to follow her. I followed her to the same room I had waited in just a few days earlier. Upon entering, I noticed a change in the room since my last visit. There in the corner sat the doctor. He jumped to his feet and reached out his arm, beckoning me to take a seat. "Please, please," he said quickly as he ushered me toward the already reclined patient's table. "Have a seat." As I sat down, he whipped out the ultrasound machine and abruptly reached for my shirt. Beginning to pull it up, I swatted his hand away. "Hey, slow down." I snapped at him. "I don't have all day, young man. Now let me do my job and see what we got here." His eyes refused to wander. The doctor's gaze was fixed firmly on the lump beneath my shirt. He seemed out of breath as he began to lightly pant. The stench emanating from between his teeth and gums drifted into my nose. It's better to just get this over with quickly, I thought to myself. I reluctantly brought my fingers down to the hem of my shirt and lifted it. As soon as the lump emerged, the doctor let out an audible gasp. His eyes widened as he stared at my side. He lifted his old, wrinkled hand and gently let a finger caress my side. "So what's the issue? Why is it growing?" I asked. The sound of my voice in the quiet office startled the doctor out of his stupor. He grabbed the ultrasound and began applying the clear jelly to it. He pressed it to my side again, and I was once more startled by how cold it was. He rubbed the wand back and forth, staring at the monitor. This continued for several moments, with only the sound of his hot, rank breathing breaking the silence. "Well, there's nothing wrong with it," he said faintly, the wand still moving back and forth. "That doesn't make any sense," I said with a tinge of irritation as I grabbed the side of the monitor to pull it into view. "No," he shouted. The sound of his booming voice coming from his withered, old body made me jump, and I let go of the monitor. "It's grown so much since I started taking medicine. Haven't you ever heard the saying that it needs to get worse before it gets better?" he said through gritted teeth. "Thank you, doctor. I really appreciate your help." I jumped down from the table. But, I think I'm going to see about getting a second opinion about this." My eyes drifted to the ground. I could feel his eyes burning a hole through my forehead, and the air in the room felt thick from the tension. "They'll tell you the same thing I did, boy," he growled. "I've been practicing medicine since before you were born. It's nothing personal. I just want to explore my options." I dashed out the door and briskly walked down the hallway toward the exit. The doctor slammed the door open hard enough that it shook the walls. He stomped out of the examination room. He was frail and old. I could easily outrun him, but his voice proved to be more challenging to escape. "You petulant piece of shit, get back here." His shouts followed me down the hallway and out of the building. I could faintly hear him from outside, and I sprinted towards the nearest bus stop a few blocks away. I arrived just as the bus opened its doors. I climbed the stairs and made my way to a seat, plopped down, and slouched in my seat. I knew it was unlikely that the doctor would have followed me this far or this quickly, but I shuddered at the thought that he might spot me riding past and take the opportunity to hurl more insults my way. As I sat slumped down and hiding, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. This had to be the doctor. He was calling me to give me an earful. It rang in my hands as I stared blankly at the screen. There was nothing on earth that would make me answer that call. It finally stopped ringing. I tilted my head back in relief and stared at the gum stuck to the ceiling. Ding. My eyes shot back down. A voicemail. I pressed play and lifted the phone to my ear. What I heard wasn't the doctor. To my surprise, it was a young voice. A woman's voice. Kind and gentle. Hi, I'm a nurse at the Wellspring Clinic. My name is Celeste. I'm calling for Colin, and I just want to say I am so sorry. I just saw and heard how Dr. Richards treated you, and I am so sorry. Please call me back when you get an opportunity. Her voice had a soothing quality to it that lulled me into a peace I hadn't felt since Mother was still alive. It brought me comfort, something I thought I would never know again. This was the day my life changed forever. Story 9. I'm a summer camp lifeguard, and someone wants me to drown the kids. The town of Spectral Lakes. Washington is known for the glut of ghost stories choking the annals of our history. You can't enter a single gift shop, motel, or museum without gaudy flyers advertising our ghost tours being shoved into your periphery on every kiosk. Most of the stories are relegated to Lake Spectral, the biggest of the town's lakes, but I've always felt a much deeper connection to Lullaby Lake, mostly because of my Uncle Chung Ho. All names in the story change for privacy. Ran the summer camp there, and I lived near it for my whole childhood. But after my brother was born, Dad got a job in Seattle, and we moved away for a while, only returning after I was 16. The small town now thoroughly bored me. Staying at home wasn't an option. Dad was always at work, and Mom moved back to Korea. So, having nothing better to do, my brother Ken was like a little gnat hovering around my head, always asking me stupid questions, or just generally invading my personal space. I needed a summer job, and the local haunted roller rink wasn't hiring. Uncle Chung Ho threw me a lifeline, though, offered to let me be a lifeguard for the late afternoon shift, even let me stay in a cabin in the camp, so I could be my own man. There were ghost stories about Lullaby, of course. Before I'd move away, there were rumors floating around school about kids who walked into the lake to find lost toys and then themselves became lost. When thinking back on those stories at the time, I wondered if it was a way to warn kids about the dangers of the lake. Drowning deaths weren't uncommon in a lakeside town. The first few weeks of the job were easy. The kids who grow up around the lakes already know how to swim, so I only really had to worry about the visitors. A couple kids needed help sometimes. Nothing serious took place. A few fights over toys resulted in tears, and I had to break up violent water gun battles. But it was a chill experience overall. I even got to spend an almost intoxicating amount of time with the other lifeguard, Bethany, without my kid brother trying to butt in. She was another Spectral Lakes native. Once, when I was on duty, she hung out with me despite her shift being over. I kept fidgeting with my whistle as she talked, and scarcely dared to look at her blue-green eyes. "You're lucky you started this year. Last year sucked bad," she said. She pulled at her black ponytail. I watched a couple kids try to climb up on the giant log bobbing against a rope marking off the safe swimming area. They managed to gain holding on the slippery surface before the log slowly rotated, sending the kids laughing and splashing to their doom. "What happened?" I asked. The whistle's lanyard was tight around my fingers. "A kid drowned. Snuck in after hours on a dare." She adjusted herself on the wood camp chair. The peeling paint stuck to the bottoms of her forearms. The morning lifeguard found him. He quit after. Oh! My finger went white, its circulation cut off. I untangled it from the lanyard. Must have been awful to see. A few kids on the shore were trying to skip rocks, but kept throwing them way too close to the swimming area. I blew the whistle and got them to stop. Yeah, he told me the kid must have died the night before, but something was really weird about the body. I took a tentative glance at her. Her eyes looked far off, past the pine trees on the other side of the lake. "What?" I asked. There were bruises around his ankles. Police said that his feet must have gotten tangled in debris. A mosquito buzzed near her thigh. She didn't seem to notice, but that lifeguard told me they looked more like hand marks. Chung Ho never told me. I said, brows raised. She shrugged. Didn't want to scare you off, Proly. She smiled at me. It was simple, almost put on in order to lighten the mood. But still, I glanced away from her, cheeks red. It was good that I did. I noticed something. A blur of orange lurked under the water near the border rope. A few brown fingers showed their tips above the surface before sinking down. I jumped from the tower, grasping my rescue buoy, and diving into the lake. The water was freezing. I shouldn't have focused on that in such a life or death moment, but I was used to the temperatures of Washington lakes, and this was unusually cold for a summer day. I grabbed at the orange blur before me, fingers closing in on swimsuit material. I got a grip around a small arm with my other hand and dragged it up to the surface. The kid emerged in a huff. I propped her up on the buoy and quickly towed her to land. She hacked up the water in her lungs, thankfully not having enough in there that she needed any more help with. The other kids stopped what they were doing and watched with mouse agape. Mr. Choi, is she okay? Asked a friend of hers. Ha! Katie can't swim, jeered one of the asshole kids. Katie's red eyes bloomed with scared tears. You okay? I asked. My Barbie's gone. I dropped her and tried to get her back. She's gone forever. Before a fresh batch of wails erupted from her, I looked down. Could have sworn her ankles looked red, too. But before I could get a better look, Bethany descended on her, waves of comforting words coming from her lips as she put an arm round Katie's shoulder. Do you want a Sonic popsicle? I got one in the freezer. Offered Bethany. Katie wiped at her red eyes and gave a nod as she wheezed. I reported the incident to her parents and my uncle. After what felt like hours of my uncle and I calming down her hysterical mother over the phone, it was twilight on the lake. I went to my little cabin, which wasn't much more than a small bedroom and bath, and slipped out of my swim trunks. Oh shit, I said as I put my lifeguard gear away. My whistle was missing. It was a cheap little thing, but Uncle Chung-ho was cheap about replacing stuff. I walked back out to the lake to comb the shore for it, but it was getting real dark, and I figured I'd just find in the morning. So I stopped. After dinner, I settled into bed and felt a wave of exhaustion overtake me. I got a text from Ken about how he ate tacos that day and liked them. For some reason, he kept using my dad's phone to update me on random things. Usually I'd play gacha games or something before I slept, but I could barely keep my eyes open, so I just let myself drift off. I felt cold water all around me. My eyes seemed frozen shut, so my body just floated in blackness for a while. I kicked my legs, hoping to get my head above water, but I had no idea where I was going, and there was something wet and slimy curled around my ankle. I screamed in surprise. Even after kicking vigorously, it just stayed firmly in place, as if it had been tied there to anchor me to the lake bed. Lake bed, that was it. It must be a lake plant, and if it was growing from the bed, so the opposite direction would be my ticket out of the water. I tried to calm myself and bend down to pull away the weeds, but knew my breath wasn't going to last much longer. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. The rubbery weed was tough to tear through, and my fingers refused to bend right in the cold. I kept trying to force my eyes to open, but they wouldn't. The darkness grew more oppressive as air leaked from my lungs. I felt around for the body of the weed and pulled myself down it like a reverse climbing rope. The sandy lake bed was under my fingertips. My nails dug into the roots, grains getting stuck under them. I tried planting my feet on the sand and pulling it out, but nothing seemed to work. Things were getting desperate now. The more effort I used, the more breath left my body. The water around me started to feel like a vice, pushing and crushing me inward even as my nerves numbed. My joints started to refuse my brain's orders. I grew listless, consciousness fading. I began to feel impossible things in my last moments. I thought I could smell my mom's cooking, but it was just water pouring into my nose. I heard her laugh, but it was just bubbles rushing into my ears and bloodstream. In the still waves, my limp body floated for minutes. I thought I was dead, but I still heard a weak heartbeat through it all. Every pulse of blood in my limbs felt like a needle jamming life into a block of ice. Something touched me. It was almost like hair, or one of those sheer fabrics that people use to wrap bouquets. The thing gently washed across my shin, then again at my feet. Then it was gone, and I heard my whistle. I knew it was my whistle because my brother had banged it up, and it never sounded quite right after that. But there it was, its sound echoing through the water, and that sound somehow got me to move. I could move. It was impossible, but I could, despite my body being weighed down by the lake's water that now filled it. The weed relaxed, freeing my leg, and next, I finally could open my eyes. It was still extremely dark, but I could make out some of what was around me. I saw the awful weed that had trapped me here. I saw the lake bed scattered with plant life and litter. And at my feet was the most surprising thing. The toy Katie had lost. It was a Barbie doll with a fabric mermaid tail. The fins must have been what brushed me earlier. Her painted face looked up at me, smile wide but eyes sad, like she missed her owner. I picked her up. Despite the exceptionally more serious situation I was currently in, I somehow felt like I needed to return her to Katie. She didn't want to be here. The whistle screamed again. I turned my head to face the sound. It came from deeper in the lake. The lake bed curved downward into a darker valley. I decided to follow the whistle. My lungs were full of water, and my feet walked on the lake bed like I was a spaceman on the surface of Mars. So clearly this was a dream. Why should I worry about getting to the surface now? May as well see where this goes. I tread through the ice-cold environment. The valley went deeper and deeper, through areas the moonlight struggled to pierce. Still, I wandered, guided by that eerie sound. To the left I saw an old toy diving ring. To my right, a sunk fishing dinghy. I stepped on a broken bottle as I walked, cursing to myself. My words were garbled as bubbles erupted from my mouth. A trail of blood floated up from my heel. Still, I kept walking. Soon it was too dark to see. I stopped then. The full brunt of what was happening here was at the edge of crashing down on my psyche. A light was visible in the distance, cold and blue. I walked toward it. I heard the whistle again. It was followed by a choir of whispering laughs. Dark shapes were outlined in the light, man-made structures. I couldn't make them out yet. The Barbie in my hand hadn't changed expression. It was a doll, I told myself, but somehow she looked scared. It's stupid to admit, but I hugged her close to give myself even an ounce of comfort as that blue light grew brighter. Amongst those dark shapes, I thought I saw something white moving, flitting from one shape to the other. I strained my eyes to see more, but my sight, despite the light getting brighter, was blurring more and more. The feeling of drowning began to overtake me again. I clutched the doll as I bent forward. I coughed violently, as if trying to hack the whole lake out of my lungs. Darkness pressed in on my vision. The whistle's cry cut off prematurely. The last thing I saw before blackness overtook me was a white face highlighted in blue. I woke up with a lot more coughing. It felt like it took a half hour before I could properly breathe again. My bed was soaked, like I'd sweated out all the soda I drank yesterday. When I got the chance to look up, I noticed my door was unlocked. I quickly locked it and stumbled to the bathroom. What a terrible night. I shoved my bed sheets into a bag. They really needed to be washed. I walked out of my cabin and headed for the laundry. The lake was as beautiful as ever in the morning light, but I felt a sudden aversion when looking at it that I'd never experienced before. Yawning, I continued down the shoreline in my sandals, which I could hardly feel how under my feet were, when a speck of hot pink caught my eye. A mermaid Barbie perched on the sand. Water lapped up at her fins. She smiled. Her stiff plastic arms pointed up at the sky, and beside her, almost dissolved amongst the sand, were bloody footprints leading out of the water. I looked down at my foot. Blood had pooled at the bottom of my sandal. I didn't want to go to my shift that day. I used the first aid station to patch up my cut foot, but I kept shivering whenever I caught even a glimpse of the lake now. Of course, I didn't tell Uncle Chung Ho the real reason I didn't want to do it. I just blamed it on my injury. Well, you can still walk, can't you? He said to me while I nervously stood in his office. You can use your eyes. You can swim. He gave me a look. I shrugged. I could have used that cabin of yours to store more tubes. Now I got to keep them in the cafe. You know how hard it is for me to make coffee when there's 50 giant rubber inflatable donuts in there. You said that kids don't want coffee anyway, so the cafe's only needed for the adult camp season. Yeah, and who in here is an adult? He gave me another look as he pointedly unscrewed the lid of his thermos and took a long gulp of decaf. He wiped his chin and raised his brows. The least you can do for me is do your job with a little cut on your foot. Yeah. My eyes fixed themselves on the patchy carpet before I dared to speak the next words. But, hazard pay would be nice. Chung-ho glared at me with the concentrated power only an uncle could. Noah, remember what happened right before you moved away? I shrugged, trying to figure out where this was going. The fancy playground I just bought went missing. The whole thing. I got it with a loan I'm still trying to pay off. Now you want to get paid? You don't want to go bankrupt, do you? I shrugged again, regretting saying anything about getting paid. The memory of that incident came back to me now. On reflection, it was really weird. The whole playground was stolen, the only bits remaining being some leftover screws and wagon wheel tracks that went straight into the lake. Police said there was only evidence of a singular thief, and that he'd worked through the night disassembling it and bringing the pieces onto a boat. No, Uncle Chung-ho, I don't want that. I was just joking. Jokes should be funny, Noah. I walked out his office, wincing even as I stepped lightly, already feeling sufficiently emasculated by the way I'd hugged that doll last night. I was desperate to hide my trembling when I took over Bethany's shift later that day. I failed. You all right, Noah? She asked, looking me up and down after she descended the lifeguard tower. It's kind of cold today, huh? I responded, pressing my shivering hands to my sides. Not really. Bethany unwrapped a fresh popsicle, which was already dripping. Princess Seafoam. A sudden squeal mercifully ended the conversation. Katie spotted the Barbie poking out of my tote and immediately gave the doll what would have been a bone-breaking hug if it had been alive. Yeah, I found it on the beach this morning, I said, shifting my weight away from my cut foot. Thank you, said Katie, who jumped up and down. She wore her campground clothes, not her swimsuit. Probably not in the mood to get into lullaby. I sympathized. If you hadn't saved her, she was going to get taken by the weeds. Katie said, shaking her head and petting the doll's hair. Weeds? I wondered, heart thumping. What do you mean? Lullaby weeds take toys down deep, she said matter-of-factly. Maybe the lake likes to play with them. I dunno. Before I could ask anything else, she ran off towards her cabin. Good on ya. That mermaid could have drowned. Bethany said. My shivers ceased as I looked at her warm smile. I climbed up the lifeguard tower with a salute. There were a lot of kids out today. Coupled with the fear from last night's dream, it made the job much more stressful than usual. My whistle being gone, I almost lost my voice from yelling so much. My eyes kept darting from kid to kid, trying to make sure every head dipped underwater for a normal amount of time. Bethany decided to stay with me again. I liked the company, but when she talked with me or tried to show me some videos on her phone, I kept my eyes on the water. There was even a moment when she reached up and tugged on my trunks to get my attention, then offered me a Powerpuff Girls popsicle. I just smiled and accepted it without turning my head. It took all my strength to keep this up, but I couldn't let myself get distracted. Whenever I glanced away from the swimmers, my thoughts flashed back to the feeling of water surging up my nostrils and the heaviness that came with waterlogged lungs. I imagined finding the bodies of children floating up to the surface. Shit, there. A kid way out was bobbing his head out of the water silently, barely able to gasp as he desperately whirled his arms. Bethany immediately followed my gaze and leapt to her feet. Before I could move, she said, I got this. You played the hero yesterday. She grabbed my rescue buoy and made a graceful dive into the water. I called everyone out of the lake. A mass of kids gave disappointed signs and made their way to the shore. In the span of several 10 seconds, Bethany swam over to the drowning kid, but before she could reach him, he sank under the water and didn't come back up. Bethany saw him go down and took a deep breath, following after him. Seconds passed, and then more. Something was wrong. I jumped forward, but somehow my trunks had caught fast on a nailhead. My body lurched down, the threads broke. I painfully landed at the base of the lifeguard tower. My shoulder ached. For a second I wondered if it was dislocated. I spat sand out of my mouth and stumbled to my feet before managing a beeline towards the water, my shoulder crying in protest. I swam as fast as I could to the spot both of them had disappeared. Just before I went down, Bethany breached the water, gasping and sputtering. Her face was awash in fear. I can't find him. I pulled goggles over my eyes and dove. Terror sunk its claws into me as the water overtook my head. I tried my best to push it all away as I frantically searched for the boy. He'd been wearing black swim trunks, which are frustratingly hard to spot in a lake. I went deeper until I found a silted bottom. There, in the weeds, a pale face shone between the green strands. Small bubbles of air burbled from its open mouth. Its lips were blue, muscles aching for air. I tore through the weeds until the boy's small body was free. Propping him under my arm, I propelled myself off of the lake bed and shot toward the surface. The next few minutes were some of the worst of my life. Bethany called for Uncle Chung-Ho and the ambulance. While we waited for help, it was up to us to get this kid breathing again. We'd screamed at the kids on the shore to go back to their cabins, but they didn't move, just staring in horror at their friend's blue skin. CPR training forced itself to the front of my mind. All of my energy went into compressions. I didn't want to break the kid's sternum, but the water just wasn't coming out. I sang to myself, using it to keep time on the compressions while calming my own heart from stopping. Every second felt agonizing. His eyes didn't move under his lids. This was my fault. I hadn't been paying enough attention. I was so overtaken by fear that I almost didn't notice when he started coughing. The kid retched out dirty lake water. Turning on his side, his bile burst from his throat and onto the warm dirt. Seeing the color return to his face, I started to cry. My uncle congratulated me warmly. He was proud I'd saved another kid's life. I felt cold. 2 close calls in a row was too many. Bethany didn't talk much after the kid was handed over to EMTs. I could tell she was in a shock. Probably felt horrible that she had almost let him drown. She went home looking pale. As I got back into my cabin's bed, the sheets now clean and dry, I rubbed my sore shoulder while I waited for the pain meds to kick in. I wondered if it was possible for me to sleep after all that had happened. I slipped out of bed to make sure my door was locked. I stood there for a moment, looked out my windows at the lake. I closed the blinds. My phone buzzed. Wow, I'm playing Mario now. He's cool. I like the turtles. How much access did Dad let this kid have to his phone anyway? The rest of my messages were filled with notifications for new events in my gacha games. So I tried to get my mind off of things by playing them a bit. But while my character rode around in search of PNGs to gamble for, I soon slipped out of consciousness, the relaxing music taking me deep into the fathoms below. That blue light again. I saw it before me. I was back under the waves, toes dug into the sand of the lake bed, standing right where I drifted off the night before. The sudden feeling of water seeping through every nook and cranny of my being flooded my senses. I shuddered, which caused ripples of water to disturb the sand, pushing it back in gentle eddies. The whistles sounded again, much closer. The blue light and blackened shapes beckoned, so I walked toward them, one plodding step at a time. And then the shapes finally crystallized into identifiable architecture. This was a little town. Well, not an actual sunken town. I'd seen pictures of those on the internet before, and they were a lot bigger than this, made up of normal buildings. This was something different. It almost looked like it had been built here, under the water, not flooded. There were several small buildings, some with doorways barely taller than my legs, and all of them were ramshackle, structures made of driftwood hammered together with clumsy hands. The biggest buildings, if you call them that, were made from the hulls of upside-down boats. A few were modern speedboats and the like, but a lot were much older, like an 1800s logging raft or a fishing dinghy. Doorways were carved out of them, and they were all decorated in some form or fashion. One little hut had tiny shells stuck around the doorframe, smooth large stones made for tiny pathways between houses. Another structure was lined with fishing nets braided into curious patterns. The bones of various fish stuck out of a boat's hull like a gruesome mohawk. Some of these buildings had large, misshapen balloon-like things tied to them, which floated a distance from the light. So I couldn't make out exactly what they were. Lost toys were placed around, as if this was their home. An old porcelain doll covered in lake moss stood at a shop counter, as if she was preparing to sell her wares. Her hair floated in a cloud around her, but the lack of a current made it as still as a picture. I saw plastic construction toys near one hut. Broken G.I. Joes stuck in sand like a battalion ready to shoot me. A chip tea set with a lake crab curled under a teacup. The source of the blue light was a large old fisherman's lantern, the kind that'd be used to ward sailors from the lakeshore at night. It illuminated the centerpiece of the little town, a playground. This was the only piece that wasn't makeshift. It was a whole Caso playground with slide and everything that was somehow sunk in the middle of the lake. This was Uncle Chung-Ho's. I started when I realized that someone was inside it. Tiny white hands gripped the bars. I couldn't identify the face of their owner. It was wreathed in darkness. A pink beaded bracelet circled one wrist. My heartbeat was in my ears. Water clogged my throat. I tried to speak. No bubbles came forth this time. There wasn't any air left in my lungs to produce them. Who are? I managed, but I sounded too garbled to be anywhere understandable. The hands moved. Slowly. They uncurled from the playground bars and slunk back into the gloom. Then, with a kind of unsteady, waving motion, one hand appeared again under the blue light. It held my whistle. I breathed lake water in and out. Each breath was longer and more painful than any on land. I stepped closer to the hand, though every nerve told me to run away. Where would I run to? This was a dream. It had to be. I needed to find out who was haunting it. My fingers touched the ice-cold metal of the whistle. The hand didn't move. I couldn't pull the whistle from its frozen fingers, and the closer I looked at them, the more I could see that they were swollen. The hand pulled itself closer to its body. I was moved with it. A face appeared in the gloom, motes of silk floating about the dead skin. All I could do was watch while bloated. Misshapen lips pulled themselves over small teeth as a whispering girl's voice pried itself in the folds of my brain. Stop saving them. I awoke at the edge of the lake. It was just before dawn. The lake was completely quiet. I stood there for a moment, in shock, watching the water crawl up to touch my feet, as if beckoning me back down with it. Up and back, up and in the early morning light. It was hard to discern anything, but I started to see little shapes in the waves, gently swaying with the tide, bobbing up and pulling me back. They looked like children's fingers. I staggered back from the shoreline, as the full brunt of everything I'd been through hit me. I threw up silted water, my stomach's contents making a mess of the beach chairs beside my cabin. Son of a bitch, I said between retches. All the water was finally out of my body, but I still felt the slimy pond algae mucking up my throat and nose. I retreated into my cabin and drank a few cans of soda to try and wash it down, then gargled a bottle of mouthwash. I showered and scrubbed every last part of myself I could find. I still felt nasty inside. I sensed silt inside the crannies of my bloodstream, sand in between the joints of my bones. It was like the lake itself had infected me totally. I sat in the corner of my room next to my heater, my blanket pulled over my shivering body. Nothing warmed me up. The hands of the clock ticked by. Lunchtime was coming soon. The first group would be heading to the lake for free time after they ate, where Bethany would watch them. I thought of the whispered words I'd heard last night and burst out of my cabin, heading for my uncle's office. It took several lies to get him to shut down swimming that day. I insisted I'd seen teenagers sneak onto property and throw used needles onto the beach. I also reasoned it was a good idea to keep the kids out of the water for now, out of respect for the incidents yesterday. My uncle agreed and announced the news over the PA system to the disappointment of the kids. He was impressed with my maturity. He said, I didn't feel noble, just scared. Uncle told me he'd asked the janitors to take care of things when they came tonight. Didn't know what I'd say to them when they didn't find anything. How would I keep this up for even a few more days? Would I have to pollute the lake myself? I said my goodbyes and started back to my cabin. On the way, I saw Bethany walk away from the lake dressed in her lifeguard swimsuit and a pair of sweatpants. I caught her eye and she sidled up to me. Bummer about the lake. We're still gonna get paid, right? She asked. You are. I get paid with food and shelter. Is that legal? According to Choi family law. She chuckled, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She looked distracted. By the way, since you're not doing anything right now, I stood up straight, my fingers tangling up with one another. Could you do something for me? What? I need to restock the popsicle freezer. Your uncle doesn't want to bother with it right now, but you've seen how much the kids like it. I mean, a dessert freezer right by the lake? It's just so perfect, right, Noah? I gave a half smile. Is this request really for the kids, or just you? Come on, I'll pay you back. She grinned. Chung-ho wants me to stay on site, even if I'm not working that. I didn't have a reason to stay at the camp anyway. The kids wouldn't be swimming. Plus, getting away from it felt like a good idea, if only to try and stay sane. No excuses, I suppose. All right, I'll be back later. Bethany beamed. Cool. And make sure to get SpongeBob ones. Aye, Captain. I didn't have a car, but Spectral Lakes was small, so walking wasn't challenged. But my foot still ached, and it took about a half hour to get to the nearest crummy corner store. I leisurely scanned the shelves looking for ugly cartoon popsicles. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and glanced at the screen. See you soon. Ken. My head tilted in confusion. What did he mean? I didn't remember plans for him to come to the camp today. Might have been a mistake, or an old text that finally went through. I picked out a bunch of popsicles and swept them into my basket. I then was faced with a dilemma of how I was going to keep them from melting in the long walk back. I added a bundle of ice to the order, then a cooler, then despair at the state of my finances. That's when another text came. You are not here, sad face. Oh well, Beth is watching me. Ken, okay, so that first text was a mistake. Something about this made me start to feel nervous. My brother was at camp being watched specifically by a lifeguard, not one of the counselors. I didn't like the sound of that. Did my dad drop him off with my uncle? If so, he wouldn't be swimming today, right? Even if Bethany was watching him, she knew the lake was closed. She wouldn't break the rules. I tried to shake off my anxiety, but it wouldn't go. The shivering feeling from yesterday started again. I had to go back. Now, I left my filled-up basket at the door to the chagrin of the shopkeeper and ran down the road towards the camp. Why was it so far away? As I sprinted, the cut on my foot opened up again. My footsteps trailed blood as I went. But I didn't care. My panic was rising and drowning out every other feeling. One car stopped when it saw me, and a concerned woman poked her head out the window, asking if I was okay. I managed to convince her to drive me to the camp, insisting it was an emergency. She nodded, shocked, and we drove the remaining 5 minutes. She asked if she needed to call 911, but I told her it was a family matter. I made a beeline for the lakeside. My head swiveled around like an owl as I tried to find Ken. I didn't see him or Bethany anywhere. My trembling fingers tried to type on my phone. Ken, where are you? My dad texted back. I dropped him off with your friend Bethany. They're going for a swim. My heart dropped. I looked out on the water. The swimming area was empty, save for a single toy floating on the surface. Ken's boat. I waded into the water. This was something I'd done the past few nights. Even if I hadn't been conscious of it, I knew where Ken was. I had to go get him. My fingers pierced the water as I dove. I went deeper and deeper, pressure popping my ears. The lake that was inside me felt like it responded to being back in the water. Currents carried me to the lake bed. Air bubbled out of me. The lake took over, and darkness encompassed my mind. I stood where I'd appeared last night, a good distance away from the underwater town. The blue light remained there like a star in the deep lake. I charged forward through the muck, my steps disturbing the silt and flinging it up into the stillness. I thought I could hear something in the town ahead. A choir of whispers, a giggle. My muscles strained against the pressure as I urged them to go faster. I almost stepped on that broken bottle again. Biting my lip, I picked it up and hid it behind my back. As the forms of the little buildings finally came into focus, I saw something that made my blood run even colder. In front of the sunken playground was Bethany. She had a smile on her face and sat cross-legged on the lake bed. A teacup touched her lips as she mimed drinking from it. Her eyes looked almost glazed over. It was horrifying, but the thing she played with was even more so. Across from Bethany sat the corpse of a little girl. It was wrapped in lakeweed, which drifted about her swollen white face like tendrils of living hair. Her eyes were gone, picked clean by lake scavengers. Flesh sloughed off of her body like smeared dough. What was left of her mouth pulled into a mockery of a smile. A giggle traveled through the water as her adipose cere-laced hands poured tea into Bethany's cup. "Where's Ken?" I screamed at the two of them as best I could. Somehow my words carried in the water, despite my empty lungs. It almost felt like the lake itself carried my intention. Bethany and the corpses' heads turned to face me, wreathed in cold blue light. "He's not ready to play yet," Bethany said. She stood up and placed herself in front of the corpse protectively. "Bethany, what were you doing?" She was quiet. "I need my brother. Where is he?" I yelled. Bethany's ponytail spread out around her head in the gloom. It almost looked like a dark halo. "My sister is lonely," she said simply. For the first time, I noticed, even to the layers of decomposition, that her and the corpse shared several traits. The black hair, the sharp brows, and matching beaded bracelets. How long has she been down here? I whispered. The corpse's vacant eye sockets stared at me. "We're twins," was all Bethany said. I thought I could feel tears on my face, but the only indication of their existence was a bit of salt in the thousands of gallons of fresh water around me. "Please, where's Ken?" I begged. "He's staying. He doesn't want to leave. It's nice here." Bethany's face was still. "Why don't you stay and keep her company?" I yelled, "Keep my brother out of it." Bethany didn't answer. Instead, the piercing whisper of the corpse's words dug into my brain. "She brings me new friends." The sentence sent a violent shiver down my spine. In the shadowy doorways of the huts, I glimpsed the wavering, twisting forms of other small bodies. Watching me, there was a boy with weeds tangling his feet. He carried the handles of a jump rope. A girl with a fish darting between her empty ribs slowly pushed a toy car back and forth. The balloons I thought I'd seen last night weren't that at all. The bodies of more children were there, floating upside down with weeds around their necks like a hanging scene from the lake's reflection. They drifted in the water, whispered to one another, used the weed to pull themselves downward to the lake bed, like I'd done the first night I'd been drowned. They moved silently, all drawing closer to me while hugging toys desperately to their chests, as if those were the last bits of humanity left of them. The freshest body was a boy with a campground wristband on his arm. I couldn't move, or even think. That's when I heard a whistle blow. I looked around for the source of the noise. It came from the largest hut, made from the hull of a wooden boat. I moved past Bethany, who grabbed my wrist and pulled me to face her. "It's too late," she said. "Go home. Noah, live. I like you." Her pale face moved close to mine. Cold fingers touched my chin. Numb lips closed over my own. I wrenched out her grasp, squeezing so hard on her wrist that I heard a crack resound in the darkness. She cried out and fell to her knees. I didn't look back, charging into the large hut and gasping at the sight within. Ken lay on a bed of weeds. He was still, eyes bleary, but I could see a whistle tucked between his teeth. I hovered over him, my face twisted in pain, looking for any sign of life. In the perfect stillness of the lake bottom, there were only two things I could hear, my own heartbeat and Ken's. I hugged him, then propped him up against my side and swam out of the boat. Tens of dead eyes watched us. I quickly swam up, kicking my legs as fast as they would go. Hundreds of little fingers closed in around my vision. I swam harder and harder. The water filling me weighed me down, but my heart gave life, if even a little, and I just outpaced the corpses. That's when I felt the weeds begin to wrap themselves around us. The girl's whisper slunk into my thoughts. "Please don't go." I wielded the broken bottle, like a hunted cat swipes its claws. The glass tore away at the weeds one after the other. In my desperation, I cut my own legs, but it was worth it as we broke free and kept traveling upward. Noah, Bethany's fingers closed around my ankle. I cut them, too. I only glanced behind me for a second, but in that glimpse, I saw Bethany reach out for me again, and Miss desperately tried to reach us even as her wrist flopped at her side and blood bloomed from her other hand. Her face was twisted in pain and fear. When the corpses realized that their intended prey was escaping their grasp, they instead moved to the easier prey. They needed someone to stay with them. All I heard was a gurgling scream slowly fading away behind me as I swam up. My brother and I burst from the surface of the lake. We were a good distance from shore, and it took some time for me to finally propel us onto it. The entire time, we got lighter and lighter as we coughed out the lake. As soon as we touched the dirt, we crawled as far as we could manage before rolling onto our backs, gulping down the precious pine-scented air. The sight of the sunlight no longer filtered through cold water warmed my shivering body. I turned to look at Ken, who I could tell felt the same. He started to cry and I hugged him. I patted his back to help him out as the remnants of the depths dribbled from his mouth. Flashbacks of when I burped him as a baby came to mind. That protective feeling of holding my newborn brother mirrored my current emotions as clearly as the reflections on the lake's surface. Thank God. Thank God. I said into his hair as I held him close. He started to try and speak. I found your whistle. I know. You did good. I knew it was yours 'cause I broke it. Yeah, that's okay. I didn't want to be down there. I know. You're out now. You'll be okay. They didn't have Takis down there. I think it would have sucked. I laughed. Yeah, buddy, you're right. All I told Uncle Chung Ho the next day was that I was bored of the job and needed something that paid. He grumbled about it, but I was let off the hook. Though, he did ask me a few times if I knew where Bethany went. She wouldn't answer his calls. I told him I hadn't heard from her either. There was an investigation to find her, but nothing ever came up in the years that followed. Ken doesn't swim anymore, but besides that, he bounced back from what happened really well. He even started getting real good at biking. Resilience of youth, I guess. I'm in college now, and decided to study in Korea. Stay with my mom and her family for a while. Even now I can feel the lake when I'm across the world. I can sense the eddies of the sand move in the ripples of water. I listen to the lapping against the shoreline. Bethany's laugh when she plays with her sister. Sometimes I can hear when Ken throws old toys into Lake Lullaby. He hopes it likes them. Story 10. I played God and I regret it. I've never been a strong man. I don't gain a sense of accomplishment with such things, but I have always been a smart man, for better or worse. I like helping people with my new scientific discoveries. I've helped cure diseases. I've helped to develop miracle drugs. I've even helped to make power stations that can change the weather in a small radius. All that good stuff, but I went too far in my pursuit of greatness this time. I tried to play God, and I paid the price. I was always fascinated by the world of science. Even when I was a little kid, it always stood out to me more than other subjects. I think the first real introduction to this field of study was in 7th grade, when my teacher had us learn about animal and plant cells, the concept of mitosis, and knowing a cell could do something like that fascinated me to no end. As soon as I got home, I begged my mother to bring me to the library so I could read the science books. In addition to cell study, I thoroughly researched all sorts of animals as to get an idea of what their biology was like. I never did go anywhere with animal studies, but my obsession with science only grew stronger the more I learned about it. My sophomore year of high school, our science teacher, Mr. Rourke, told us that we would do an experiment for our final. The only requirement? Impress me. During this time, I had fallen slightly more in line with animal biology as it helped to have an idea of how the entire body of something worked. Specifically, I had begun to research reproduction and, more importantly, regeneration. I was completely and utterly obsessed with the thought that something could not only survive mutilation, but make themselves whole again. It was completely alien, yet it made sense. It's a strange balance. I settled on planaria, a carnivorous flatworm known most for their regeneration. I had found the subject of my project. Now, as it turns out, you can find these little guys pretty easily in the United States. All I needed was some catchers, but I lived near a fishing shop, so that was likely the easiest part. With my subject chosen and my method of obtaining it within my grasp, I was ready to finally start working on my project. Since you can't really do something for the whole day during school, I waited for the weekend to try and catch my little worm friends. Having a car makes things a lot easier, so I drove to a few different bodies of fresh water in my town and set up the catchers. I figured I'd wait a day before going back and checking. What was the worst that could have happened? Having placed the traps in the water on Saturday, I chose to check them on Sunday. To my complete and utter astonishment, I had actually been successful in my endeavors. It wasn't much, but I managed to catch 3. For the contents of my project, it was going to work. I had already bought everything else I needed for the project. A water tank, tools, all that stuff. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention just what my intention for this project was. I was going to see just how much these little guys could take before they couldn't regenerate anymore. Cruel, I know, but they can't feel pain, so I'd say that makes it slightly less horrible. I started by simply cutting one in half. My plan was to harm each one to the point at which regeneration would be needed, and then record how long it would take for it to regenerate, if at all. I cut the worm in half and began a recording. A time-lapse, of course. The second worm was going to have to endure a bit more. I decided that instead of cutting this one in half, I'd crush it completely. It was terrible. No need to ask how I felt. I did it anyways. For the last one, I had a bit of trouble figuring out what to do with it. Then, I went to the bathroom. There, I found a bottle of hydrochloric acid. I got an idea. A terrible, terrible idea. Only a little bit. I told myself as I reached for it. Only a little bit. I won't kill it. I diluted the acid with a lot of water. This was years ago, so I can't really remember the details, but it was enough to cause superficial damage to the worm. I poured the acid on it, and it burned up slightly before laying flat. I then added water to each segment in the tank and began my 1-2 week-long recording. Mr. Rourke had given us 3 weeks to finish the final. So all I had to do was gather my recordings, make a document listing everything I studied, and hopefully get at least an A on this thing. I was one of the only students not doing anything at their desk in the class, so I wasn't too surprised when Mr. Rourke called me up to the front. I obliged and went up to his desk. "Hey, you called me up? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," he responded. "It's just, you're not doing anything. Is your project a home?" "Oh," I exclaimed. No, sorry. Yeah, my project is at home. It's a time-lapse kind of thing, so not exactly at school desk work." He looked puzzled and then curious. "Ray," he replied, "what are you doing for your project?" "I won't say too much, but I'm experimenting with just how much an organism can take before it gives out." He looked shocked. "Jesus, like actual animals?" "No, just worms." "Okay, well, I hope you know what you're doing. Playing God doesn't always work out." I replied, "Don't think I'm playing God. I'm just seeing how things work. I'm experimenting. If you say so. Good luck with it," he said, and gave me a pat on the shoulder. The next 2 weeks were pretty nerve-wracking. Not because anything in my life made me that way, but because I was anticipating how the worms would fare. And then, 2 weeks after I mutilated the 3 worms, I checked the results. I checked on the first one. To my complete astonishment, it had regenerated itself and essentially created a new worm. I was elated. It did make 2 worms, but I wasn't too upset about it considering that it wasn't the main objective. I checked the next one. Despite the complete crushing of it, this little worm also managed to regenerate. Amazing. I'll spare you the details. But even the acid worm regenerated. I was absolutely floored. My experiment had worked, and I caught it all on tape. I had played God, and it was a huge success. I whipped up a document detailing each worm's condition and how it wired in general, cited my sources, formatted it correctly, and put the time-lapse on a hard drive. I was going to blow everyone out of the water with this. And 1 week later, as I suspected, the project was a complete success. Mr. Rourke came to me after the final class and requested a one-on-one. Raymond, you know I don't pick favorites, but I have to say, I think that may have been my favorite project any student has done. Ah, thanks, Mr. Rourke. It was quite interesting. I think I want to do more research in this field. It's fascinating stuff. Well, it was good teaching you. I just hope you keep one thing in mind. He said as I was exiting the classroom. Oh, and what's that? Be careful when you play God. You never know what could go wrong. And that was the last I saw of him. You probably know the rest. Went on to study cytology at some high-end university. Graduated, found different jobs and all that. So where did that leave me? Well, my next plan of action was clearly to create medicine using the DNA of the planarian. I already had a great reputation among the science community. So when I pitched my idea to create a cure for injuries using the biology of a flatworm, all I was asked was, how long will it take? It took a long time, years that will stand out to me as some of the most important in my life. And then I met Andrea. It was at a science convention. Funnily enough, some up-and-coming brain surgeon was talking my ear off about neuroscience, this, and brainstem, that. I was about to tell him that I saw a future in his eyes when she ran into me by accident. Oh, sorry, she said, turn around to see who she'd just run into. That was when we stopped. There, for a moment, it was just the two of us. She was tall, hazel-eyed with long auburn hair and freckles. She was beautiful, and I realized there for the first time that I had never really been in love before. Andrea changed that. Oh, it's okay. I'm fine, really. No, look, she exclaimed. I spilled something on your shirt. It was true. She had spilled some sticky beverage, and it was quickly making for a crusty stain on my shirt. Oh no, really, it's fine. I responded. Nonsense. She responded. I'm sure there's something for drinks here. Let me buy you one. Once more, I'll spare you the details, but we entered that convention separately and walked out together. I don't believe in love at first sight, but Andrea proved me wrong. Life only proceeded to get better from there on out. I proposed, we got married, bought a house, a dog, all that stuff. It was wonderful, and all at the same time, I was still able to forward my career. Raymond Fair, brilliant cytologist, known for, I had just gotten home from a conference deciding on whether new medicine should be regulated or not when Andrea broke the news to me. 2 lines. We were going to be parents. The pregnancy wasn't easy, but having a scientist in the house certainly made it less unbearable. Then, months and months after complications, pains, and a multitude of things, Andrea gave birth to a baby boy. On February 23rd, Thomas Fair was born. Life was wonderful. We were living comfortably. Thomas was growing up to be an excellent young man, and my marriage was stronger than ever. I finally finished the first prototype of the planet drug, nearly 12 years after I first started developing it. As I put it into a vial, the words of my old high school science teacher came back to me. Playing God doesn't always work out. I laughed. Well, it did for me, Mr. Rourke. For a time, at least. It was during the afternoon that I got the call. My wife and son had been in an accident, a bad one. Doing the right thing, I obviously abandoned whatever project I was working on and zipped over where the accident happened. In the hour that I was there, my life as I knew it ended. My wife and child were dead, killed instantly in the impact. Reports say they were both crushed from the waist down. It was a drunk driver, wasn't paying attention to the road, hit them head on. Instantly, all of what I had worked for in my life was taken away so easily. The authorities said there was no chance of them living, and that I should start sorting their stuff out. I wasn't ready to give up so easily. I'm ashamed that I did it, but hours after their passing, I broke into more they were being held in. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I couldn't bear to think of life without them. To my surprise, there wasn't a lot in the way of security, and I was able to get in and out without much trouble. I had only one thought in my head for the entirety of the drive home. You two are coming back, if God wills it. As soon as I hit the driveway, I was out of the car and dragging the corpses into the house. They were coming back. They had to. I wasn't sure if I could handle things without them. I brought them down to the basement where my lab was and laid their bodies out on the 2 tables. I then went over to my solutions and picked out the 2 vials I needed. Planet drug. As I readied the injection, the words of Mr. Rourke continued to ring out in my ears. Playing God doesn't always work out. I needed this. Playing God doesn't always work out. I couldn't listen to my thoughts. Playing God doesn't always work out. Well, it was going to have to work out. I wouldn't be able to go on if it didn't. I injected both Andrea and Thomas with the plana and brought them up to their respective beds. I'd check on them in the morning. Decisions of madman or desperate choices made by a grieving used to be father and husband. I was walking a line, but I was also dangerously close to falling in on both sides. When morning came, I would find out which side I fell in. When I awoke, it was in the arms of my loving wife. I looked over and, while a bit dirty from all the more preparations, there was my wife, beautiful as the day I met her and as beautiful as she'd ever be. "Hey, sweetie, how are you feeling?" she asked, putting a hand on my cheek. "I'm doing better now," I responded before kissing her. I couldn't believe my luck. The drug I had spent the better part of 13 years making had worked. I was able to bring my wife and son back to life. The planarian DNA had repaired them. I had played God, and it worked out. Of course, something had to change. And it did one day when I found my son, sitting in front of the open fridge door, gnawing on a raw chicken that was supposed to be for dinner. "Tommy, what are you doing, buddy?" He looked at me with carnivorous eyes. I was hungry and I wanted meat. So I'm eating. I suppose I should have suspected something. But Tommy was a growing boy. I only wondered why it was raw chicken of all things that he chose to eat. We ate something else. The days went on. I caught my wife wolfing down several pieces of fish in the living room and got only the same response from her. I was starting to get worried about the well-being of our family. It was jarring when I caught both of them eating. The last experience with my son is what nearly sent me over the edge. I came up from the basement one day to a horrifying scene. There, in the middle of the living room, was Tommy. He was eating the carcass of a squirrel. I lectured him on why he shouldn't do that and asked where his mother was, eating the meatballs. She had been eating the meat for the dinner we were going to have that night. I felt like I was losing it, but I tried to stay positive about this. They just needed to get used to their new lives, and eventually, everything would be okay. I couldn't call the cops, because, I stole from a goddamn morgue. I shouldn't have ignored the signs. We ended up ordering takeout that night. I noticed that the ravenous hunger was shared between the two of them, as by the time I had gotten halfway through my meal, they were already done and looking for something else to eat. "What's with you guys?" I asked, putting my fork down. "We have more food if you're so hungry." My wife turned around and looked at me with the same eyes my son had earlier that day. "We're hungry. We want meat, so we're going to eat." They ended up clearing out nearly the whole fridge before going to bed. I had to do something in the basement. I was going to study just what was causing them to act like such animals. As I set up the microscope, I could hear noises upstairs. It sounded like someone was crawling around on their hands and feet. I wasn't able to get a good look at the plana sample. I heard the basement door open. "Dad, honey," it was them. "We're hungry. There's no food." I looked up the stairs and there they were, crouching and looking at me. "What's wrong with you guys?" I yelled. "Why are you so hungry?" My wife was the one to respond. "Don't know. Just want to eat." I was exasperated. What the hell was happening? "What do you want to eat?" My wife, with a hungry look in her eyes, grabbed Tommy's hand and responded. "We want to eat you, we're so hungry." I ran. I locked myself in my utility closet before they could get to me. That's where I am now, waiting and typing this. I think the worm DNA spliced with theirs and created something entirely different. I don't think that's my wife and son anymore. All is silent except for the occasional meat, food, or let us in. I wish I had never discovered those goddamn worms. I wish I had never gotten such positive feedback on that project. I wish I had taken Mr. Rourke's advice to heart. I was so busy trying to find out if I could do this stuff that I didn't stop to wonder if I should. Please, for your sake, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't try to play God, because I did, and it didn't work out.